Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Jackie Porter. I'm the Cabinet Member for Planning, which includes the built environment and also living well. And I'd like to welcome everybody here today for this particular event on living well. I'm going to hand over in a minute to Bridget Taylor, who's going to go through the presentation with you. But I'd just like to point out that actually living well has been part of the built environment portfolio for a long while, and certainly for my time for 2 years. I'm involved with organisations that are providing help for people to live well. We also work as a city council with the council owned housing department and other organisations to live well, and also we have been increasingly involved with the National Health Service and with public health. And in fact, only this morning I was with the hospital discussing their plans for new hospital, and we meet monthly on that subject. So I'm going to pass over now to Bridget. Just would like to say thank you very much for coming and for giving up your time today. And it's going to take part, you're going to have the opportunity to take part in a conversation as well, but I think Bridget is going to explain the format of the whole meeting. Thank you. Bridget, we can't hear you. Could you start again, please, with the first slide? We couldn't hear you.
Is that better?
Much better. Could you just go back? That's it. Perfect. Thank you.
So, thank you, Councillor Porter. So the reason we're having this discussion now is that we have launched a consultation as part of our new local plan, which we're calling the Strategic Issues and Priorities Consultation. So this is about setting the high-level strategy for our new local plan, and the consultation runs until April the 12th. And then the next steps from here, very briefly, are set out on this slide. So following this consultation, we will review the feedback we receive, and we will then formulate a draft plan with draft policies. And there'll be another stage of consultation at that point and a further draft plan before we go on to submit the draft plan to the government's inspector, who will review it and determine whether the policies we have set out are sound before we then go on to adopt the local plan. And once adopted, that local plan will become the policy against which future development applications are assessed. So at this stage, where we're talking about the high-level strategic issues for our local plan, we have identified 9 key issues which we think are the main priorities, and we're asking your views on whether you agree. So I've set out here the 9 key issues. We've got carbon neutrality, biodiversity and the natural environment, conserving and enhancing the historic environment, homes for all, vibrant economy, promoting sustainable transport, living well, low carbon infrastructure, and ensuring the delivery and success of the local plan. So today we're here to talk about living well, which, as you can see, is one of the topics for the local plan, but we also see it as something that interacts with a lot of those topics. Obviously, the natural environment has an impact on our well-being, as does housing and the quality of our home, vibrancy of the economy and the ability to have a job, etc. So I will put this up front here. So we've got a consultation at the moment, and we're asking 2 questions to do with living well. And I thought it was worth pointing these out at the start, because the purpose of this event is to initiate a conversation which we hope will help you to have a bit of a deeper think about the topic, and then help you in formulating your response to these questions so that you can then respond to the consultation. So the 2 questions are: do you think current local plan and national policies around the provision of open space are adequate for protecting health and well-being and reducing inequality? And do you have any suggestions for how we can plan positively to create multi-generational neighbourhoods and communities where social isolation is reduced and opportunities for independent mobility are promoted? So I will hand you over to our colleagues from Hampshire County Council. We have Fariha Chowdhury and Elena Cahill here to talk us through some of the statistics about the health profile of our district, which helps us to then move on to a conversation about how the local plan can act to improve some of those statistics.
Thanks, Bridget. Hello, everyone. I'm Elena Cahill. I'm a public health principal at Hampshire Public Health Team, and I'm here today just to talk you through some of the data, really, and trying to understand how healthy Winchester is. So I thought it would be really helpful to start with to just really look at demography, so who lives in Winchester district, and some of you may be aware of this already. But in 2019, there was just over 124,000 people living in the Winchester district. And if you look at the chart on the right hand side, that shows a sort of a pyramid of the different age groups of people that are living in Winchester. So if you look at the blocks, you can see that that's actually Winchester's population. And if you look at the dark black line, that is the England average. So you can quite quickly see that actually the 25 to 40-year-old group in Winchester is quite a little bit less than we'd expect for the England average. However, we have got, if you just look at the top of the pyramid, we've got more people in the sort of the older category from about 65 years onwards. Thank you, Bridget. Next slide, please. So if we just have a very quick focus on the ageing population, we're expecting the population in Winchester district to increase in all age groups, but significantly, if you look at the graphic down at the bottom, you can see that the 85 years plus, we're expecting that to increase by 26%. And if you look at the graph on the right hand side, it actually shows the demand on services. So as you get older, understandably, you have more demand on sort of health and community health services. So that will have an impact potentially on planning issues. Next slide, Bridget, please.
Okay, so this is where we have a go at doing one of these interactive questions. So I must stress this is not compulsory. If you can participate, great, but if you don't wish to or you have difficulties, you're more than welcome to have send an email to us or so on. But if you'd like to give it a go, you can download an app on your telephone or go to the website slido.com, and it will ask you to enter a code. And that's our code there for this event is 52794. And the question that you see on the screen will be on the Slido page. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to put words into the answer box, and we will have a word cloud appear on the screen. So the more times people may answer with the same word, it will get larger, which will show us if there's particular themes that are recurring and more people have an interest in. So the question is, what do you think the implications are of an ageing population for the way we plan our district? So here we're talking about things such as housing requirements or the wider built environment, perhaps the location of housing, or issues around accessibility or green space. So there's no wrong answers, but whatever you feel might be something that needs to be considered in planning to deal with an ageing population. Lots coming through now, thank you. So that's really good. So health services, accessibility are coming up as strong themes there, but we've also got issues around the proximity of services, types of housing and distance, more care and support services, and also the size of housing. So smaller houses, 2-bed houses, issues around isolation, safety, safe walking routes, human scale, suitable accommodation, public transport, another one coming up there, and support, neighbourliness, and sorry, that one's cut off because it doesn't give you much space, but neighbourliness in neighbourhoods, I imagine, intergenerational opportunities, dementia. Great, lots of answers there. just give it another minute and then we'll move on. So isolation is now coming up big, which is no surprise given the year that has just passed. And access to facilities such as the GP, and housing for life is a good one. Energy efficient homes. Great, I think we'll move on there if that's okay with everyone, but if anyone else has other things they'd like to add, they can do so in the chat box on the side of the event. So I'll continue on with you, Elena.
Thank you. So generally, Winchester as a whole, when we look at the data that we have available to us, is generally healthy, and that's probably not a surprise to many of you that work in the district. Winchester's within the 20% of sort of least deprived districts, and has the life expectancy for both men and women is higher than the England average. It's probably important just to remember before I start and talk about the data, though, that even though there are areas that Winchester is doing well on, so for example, the number of children that live in low-income families is actually a lot lower than the England average. Actually, it's still a significant number of young people in our area that are living in poverty. So there's about 1,500 in the Winchester district. So there's always areas we could be doing better on. Can I have the next slide, please? So if we look at health inequality, so the map to your right is a map that basically signifies areas of deprivation. So the paler areas are the areas that are generally performing well on a number of different indicators. So they include income, employment, crime, living environment, education, health and disability, and they're all layered up, and then we have this map of deprivation. So you can see it's probably quite small, but for Winchester, the major pockets of deprivation are actually in central Winchester, particularly the St Luke ward. Next slide, please. So what are we doing well on in Winchester? Well, there's a range of different indicators that I can talk to you about, and here's just a couple. So in terms of hospital admissions to hospital for alcohol-related conditions, actually Winchester district's doing pretty well compared to both Hampshire and the England average. However, again, there's going to be a recurring theme to this presentation. We still had over 500 people during 2018-19 admitted to hospital for problems with alcohol, so actually it's still too high. The same, I've already touched on the number of children in low-income families, so it's 7.7 across the Winchester district, but actually if we look at this information on a ward level, actually in St Luke's it's actually 26%, so it's always important to use those variations. And then the last example I'll use is around adults classed as overweight or obese. Again, this indicator is doing very well compared to the England average. But 57.4% I would say is still too high in terms of indicators, and we'd still want to be looking at healthy weights and physical activity to increase. Okay, next slide, please, Bridget. So these next indicators are actually indicators where we potentially could be improving. So they're basically, when we look at them compared to the England average, there's no significant difference. So basically, these indicators, you're basically on a par with what's happening nationally, which is really interesting when you look at these indicators around smoking, employment, particularly the ones around active travel. I think it's just a sort of a question to think about is, would you not expect Winchester to be performing above the England average in some of these indicators? Can I have the next slide, please, Bridget?
All right.
Thank you. And these last four are actually indicators where nationally it's been identified that these are actually worse than England average. And it's really interesting when you look at, I mean, it is data, but killed and seriously injured on roads has been significantly high for many, many years, actually. When you look at the definition, it is collected by the Department of Transport, and it is around where there's high inflows of traffic. So it could be potentially, we're quite close, obviously you've got the M3 running through your area, and whether that's significantly impacting it, it's just something to be aware of. And then we also have the estimated diabetes and dementia diagnosis rates. Again, not quite sure why this is worse than the England average, but the definition for those two is really the difference between those that have been diagnosed and the estimated prevalence. So there's a bit of a mismatch in terms of unmet needs. And then lastly, excess winter deaths. So that's the extra deaths that are actually from all causes that occur in the winter months for over 65s. Now, this could be due to the fact that we have in Winchester districts slightly higher numbers than older people than compared to other areas. But again, we just need to consider these indicators as a whole. Next slide, please, Bridget. So I also wanted, in this presentation, I also wanted to make the link between physical and mental health, because we know that actually physical and mental health are intrinsically linked. I appreciate this might be a little bit detailed, and I will share a link to this index so you can go away and have a look after this presentation in a bit more detail. But essentially our public health team took a range of different indicators from mental health and well-being, layered them on top, so very much like the areas of deprivation I talked about earlier, and came up with a mental health and well-being index for Hampshire. It's a really good interactive tool. I must admit, when I was looking at the wards, I think the wards might have, it was completed about 2 years ago, so I think the wards have potentially maybe changed, so we probably need to update the tool. But actually, interestingly, for mental health and well-being, those wards that came out worst in terms of mental health tended to be the wards that were actually had lower levels of deprivation, which is it's probably not unsurprising actually. Next slide, please. I appreciate this is really probably too small to have a look at, but all the indicators I've just talked about today are on a tool that you can access quite easily over the internet. It's managed by Public Health England, and again I will put the link in so you can go and have a look at all the different indicators. You can probably just about see there's some red ones. That's the indicators that I've talked about where we're doing worse in Winchester, and then you can look at also the green and the amber ones as well, and just see how well you're doing as a district. So we can put that link in so you can have a look in a bit more detail. Final slide, please, Bridget. So just to summarise, just before I hand to Freya, I think the data that I've talked about is just really to give you a bit of a snapshot. It's trying to understand the local picture. There's lots of other things to consider when we're talking about data. So it's not just around what's happening currently. It's also considering the differences in the trends in the wards, for example. So I've already talked about the difference between St Luke and other areas in terms of what's happening there. It's also important to look at trends over time, so which I haven't had time to talk about in great detail, but actually potentially an indicator could be doing really well, but actually is still getting the trend is worse if in terms of the direction of travel. So it's just important to consider all those things. So today is just a snapshot, so it's just to put that as a little bit of a health warning right at the very end of my presentation. Okay, over to Freya.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. I'm part of the public health team at Hampshire County Council, and I'm also the spatial planning lead. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the placemaking principles of the local plan and how that's embedded into living well. So thank you, Alina, for setting the scene for us, and thanks, Bridget, for introducing. So what does healthy placemaking mean? So applying healthy placemaking principles to the local plan is ensuring that we are incorporating this aspect of living well into the wider local plan so that we can support our residents to be living healthily and thriving, as well as having access to new features embedded into the local plan, ensuring that we're sort of building for health. So this is a quote from Duncan Selby, who is the just past Chief Executive of Public Health England, which I really like. He says that a decent home, a job and friends are more important to good health than the NHS. This is part of the PHE report, Spatial Planning for Health, which was published last year, essentially talking about how through planning we can take a preventative approach to health, so that people don't need to access health services as much, kind of facilitating that health through their built environment. So healthy placemaking is accommodating for the growing and ageing population, as Alina has mentioned already, as well as growing its ageing. So we need to monitor that when we're looking at our local plan. It's also about the safe roads, reducing reliance on personal vehicles, which is linked to air quality improvements, which have benefits for both the environment as well as for our population health. And providing opportunities for physical activity. So I'll go on to this, but this is through access to open green spaces, as well as recreational space, and providing community facilities, and very importantly, to reduce inequalities as well. So looking at the wards that kind of perhaps get overlooked sometimes. Next slide, please, Bridget.
We have another interactive question here. So Freya just mentioned the point about access to open space, and I realise this is something that's been forefront in a lot of people's minds over the last year. So I thought it would be worth, again, doing a bit of a word cloud around what do you personally use open space for, or what benefits do you think it serves to yourself or to other people in the community? So I'll just give you a few minutes to have a think about that. Yeah, so lots of good ones here. Exercise, obviously, fresh air, social meeting place, and mental health, mental well-being. A release, that's a good one. A neutral place. Running routes, which are off-road. Play. Somewhere to appreciate nature, birds, nature again. And also cycling routes off-road, yes. So that social meeting place, obviously, in the last year has become more and more important, hasn't it, as an outdoor space. Picnics, gatherings. It's an interesting one. Older people do not use alone. Sunbathing, green space. A shortcut is an interesting one. So as a route to get somewhere. Somewhere to encourage movement. So obviously all of these things, different people have different needs of their open spaces. Okay, just a couple more seconds for that. Lovely. Okay, so we'll move on to have a little look at open space again, Freya. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for your responses to that. Yeah, it's really important to see what the kind of views are for how you use your open space, and exercise comes out on top, as well as all the sort of peripheral issues about safety and who kind of benefits from these spaces the most. And Public Health England, they do recommend considering these green, open, blue and recreational spaces as critical assets to improving community health. And there was a new review published last year assessing the evidence around these spaces. We also know that access to these spaces is prioritised in the open space strategy that was published by Winchester City Council in 2015. So the local plan will hopefully build on principles that were reflected in that report. And it's important to look at the benefits of these spaces for the whole population. So particularly neighbourhood design that's built to support people through the life course. So this starts with, children being able to play safely in the streets, the question of, doorstep play, playing out, sightlines from homes, and having safe and well-lit spaces for children as well as adolescents, and going through into older age for these spaces to be made accessible as well. Next slide, please. So Friends of the Earth have created a really cool tool called Access to Green Space. So this was published last year, and I plugged in Winchester to see how Winchester were doing on this scale. So you can see most of Winchester in terms of the central and south, but more so to the west. These spaces are marked as, I think it's a B grade, so on a scale of A to E. So these spaces are doing quite well, and then you can see the bit in the kind of south towards St. Catherine's Hill, and then the peripheral area is graded A. What we do see, though, and this is harking back to what Alina was saying about health inequalities, is that this area of St. Luke's and the kind of south central part, and where we see Winchester Stanmore, this is where the access to green and open space is graded as a D, which means not so great. And this metric includes both access to green space in terms of proximity to the home, including gardens, kind of plaza type areas, as well as parks and larger open spaces. So this is something to consider when we're creating place to sort of level those kind of unequal accesses. Next slide, please, Bridget.
It might be worth just mentioning there, the rest of the district is all in that dark green, so it's not shown there. This is the only
yes,
falls below the dark green. Okay, so the next question we have, leading on from open space, is a word cloud to have a think about. We've actually got two in a row here. The first one is about how our built environment, so our houses or our wider neighbourhoods or town centres, how that can impact our mental health positively. And then on the next question, we'll have a think about how it might impact it negatively. So I'll give you a moment to have a think about that. Yeah, so already some really good ones here. So decent homes, the quality of our homes can have an impact on our mental health. The amount of space we have, the scale of buildings, access to green areas, as we've said, the quality of the public realm and the streets that we walk on, the density of the buildings again, so that's linking into the one we had a moment ago, which is moved. Feeling safe, that's a really important one, about perceptions of danger. Living in a community, so about having opportunities for connection or support networks. Neighbourliness, again, linking into that. Warmth, yeah, so quality of the housing again, decent home and warmth, warm homes, comfortable homes, and I suppose comfort in the outdoors as well. And there's a good one there, picking up the aesthetics of good-looking public buildings. So we're moving to this idea of beauty in planning, which the government's keen to bring back more focus on beauty as something that is something we should be aiming for. Communal spaces to share, again, yeah, size of rooms, privacy. Choices is another good one there, and the money we have, so obviously that's going to have an impact on the type of housing and the location of housing we can afford. Maintenance of, I presume, sort of the external areas around homes or the public realm, the standard of maintenance can impact how beautiful it is. Sustainability, and the ones that are coming up, you know, regularly, they're the architecture, space, community, and the quality of the public realm. And traffic noise as well, I hadn't picked out there, trees, some really good ones there, thank you. Okay, so we'll just turn our minds now to the how these things might negatively impact our mental health, what types of places might cause us a bit of distress. Yeah, really good. So noisy places, cars, pollution, cramped, overcrowded spaces or houses, excess traffic, lack of security, so crime, cold, so the quality of our housing, cold houses, cramped, dark houses or dark, secluded areas in the public realm, lack of parking, restrictive. So again, the sight lines here and tall buildings blocking the sky, a lack of outlook or overbearing nature of buildings. Being too distant from services which you might need to access, so health services or other places you might need to visit. Really good. Industry, so I imagine that, so industrial sites, if you have residential sites near to industrial sites, that might have an impact on your mental well-being. And isolated spaces where you haven't got somewhere to meet people. Uniformity is an interesting one there, so I assume that means sort of the visual impact of housing which doesn't have interest to the eye. Narrow pavements which are difficult to get down. No way to greet your neighbours. Yeah, great. Lots of really good answers there, thank you. No play spaces. Really good. Just another second. Lovely, thank you for that. So we'll pass back to Faria to talk about social isolation.
Yeah, so those responses you've just given have really, they really kind of shine in the next few slides, where I'll kind of talk about mental health and social isolation as a result of the built environment and how we can improve those things. So we know that the causes of social isolation are complex. However, we can improve the outcomes for social isolation through improving our built environment. So the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know, has really brought this to the fore, the need to sort of reconnect with our communities and strengthening these networks. And we know that we have a really good sense of community within Winchester. There's some really strong kind of local action happening. And again, we can enhance that through the local plan and the kind of planning delivery. So again, PHE have some guidance on reducing the social isolation through the life course. So this goes through kind of, childbirth to older age. And it talks about how, we can embed community infrastructure and strengthen local networks and kind of aspects of social prescribing, for example, to reduce these kind of barriers to social interaction. Next slide, please. And this feeds into mental health. So when we feel isolated, of course, it comes at the detriment of our mental health. And again, all of those things you mentioned, aspects of the built environment that affect your mental health, whether that's positively or negatively, will have an impact. And there is an urgent need within Winchester. We've seen a local kind of need to address mental health issues. As we can see, there's a worrying suicide rate and admissions to hospital for deliberate self-harm. So again, it's enhancing community through positive building and healthy placemaking so that everyone feels supported within their kind of environment within the city to kind of access health help. Next slide, please. And local food production, I feel like sometimes we don't really talk about this enough, but this is actually a really multi-pronged solution in the built environment to a lot of problems that we might have. So, there's environmental benefits of locally producing food. There's also community benefits and, there's lots of sort of mental health and well-being gardens across the country and in different countries around the world. So we can embed these principles by, for example, having community allotments and community garden projects, as well as, having shared orchards and things like that. And there's also co-benefits for physical activity, as well as the mental health and environmental sides. So embedding these principles into the local plan will be useful for the community as well. Next slide, please. So air quality, we know that Winchester are currently going through a process of developing some more guidance for air quality. So it's building again on principles that Winchester have looked at before, looking at air quality management areas, which we already have. The council have announced a climate emergency, and there's, as I said, the consultation going around at the moment for this supplementary planning document. And we know that there's benefits to improving air quality, so co-benefits for the health and the environment, which come from, for example, the increased uptake of active travel. So that's cycling, walking, and it's important that through the local plan we can provide kind of cycling and walking infrastructure and permeability of these structures to kind of allow residents to use these facilities in the city. Next slide, please. And this is just an infographic showing how air pollution affects people throughout their life course. So it starts from birth. So women who are most exposed to air pollution often give birth to children of low birth weight on average. So in highly polluted areas in the south circular and the north circular of the M25, we've seen this documented. So this happens from birth, and then it goes through the stages of the life course. So, children developing asthma, wheezing, coughing, and this continuing to adulthood, and it starts to present in comorbidity, so cardiovascular disease, cancer, stroke. And then as we see with our aging population, these comorbidities multiply, and it affects the quality of life, and we call these disability adjusted life years. So the years that a resident lives in good health is reduced when people are exposed to air pollution and the comorbidities that come with that. Next slide, please. And yes, I've kind of touched on travel just now, but yeah, so we've got sort of existing infrastructure within Winchester to improve active travel, but of course there's always space to improve within our local plans. So the Winchester Movement Strategy is only a couple of years old, which has some of these principles of active travel, and there has been some recent funding to improve active travel opportunities around the city. And again, it's about joining up these approaches, joining up these aspects of healthy placemaking, and ensuring residents feel supported to actually use these services rather than embedding things that aren't usable for the population. And again, there's some PHE guidance about how we can work together to improve and implement active travel. Next slide, please. And it's also really important to look at inclusivity for mobility impaired persons. So this is a statutory requirement that the Disabled Persons Act have added to the Town and Country Planning Act, that developments are suited for the mobility impaired. So it's about making all of these spaces accessible. I've talked about the green spaces we have. It's about healthy housing. How do we accommodate new housing for people who have differing needs, and kind of recognizing that older people quite often are mobility impaired. So just accommodating for that within our infrastructure. And there is a best practice document there as well that was published in 2016 for that. Next slide, please.
Okay, so this is a final question, which really hones in on the consultation question we're asking. So bearing in mind everything we've just heard around the health of the district and the role that planning and a local plan might have, what are some of your ideas around, at a high level, how our local plan might be able to influence health and well-being of the population over the coming 15, 20 years? Yeah, so creating open space, obviously really important. So as we said, space for exercise, which can improve health and obesity rates, make it easier for people to access that space. Permanent park run location is a really good one. Yeah. So it's places to do, running, community activities, cycle routes. The way we design new developments, we can factor in measures to enhance health and well-being. Reducing weight of doors. We might have to ask that person to explain that one. Small development housing. Removing barriers for access. Transport to hospital. Yeah, removing barriers. Again, accessible green space. Yeah, so these are all things that the local plan has a role in. The cycling and walking infrastructure, access to open space, around our housing, the location of housing relative to hospital or places you might need to get to. Yeah. Yeah, so measures to aid connections between people and reduce isolation. So that can be around community facilities, requiring community facilities as part of large developments, and community infrastructure or open spaces to enable that to happen. So there's a good one, improving signage for walks. So it's about making it easy for people to go out and get out into nature. And that also has a role in dementia-friendly planning with wayfinding and helping people to navigate the public realm and design new developments. That's really good. Thank you. I'll just give you another couple of moments there. Yeah, make what's there better. So improve the quality of places. Provide information, another really important one there. And plans for places to embed. So not just about designing places at the planning stage, but making sure that they really bed in. And a plan for Winchester. Seating in open spaces, another really important one to make that accessible for people. Yeah, wayfinding for dementia. Reduce through traffic, important role in air quality, noise. Also making the walking environment enjoyable. Yeah, access to walks without cars. So about being able to go out your front door and find somewhere to go and get into nature without having to drive there. Yeah, giving people a say or ownership, really important. Okay, that's great. I think we'll move on, but as I say, you can plug into the chat box if you've got other things you would like to add. So just to wrap up from all of this really useful information, so we've got a new local plan website which we have created to give you information and to act as a sort of repository of information as we move through this new local plan process. So if you see here, we've got a section on the key issues, one of which is living well, and there's a drop-down box, and under there I've got all of these different documents here that you can go if you are interested in a particular issue. We've added those documents there so that you can do a bit more reading if that's of particular interest to you. And the Have Your Say section of the website shows you how you can respond to the consultation. So there's a facility to enable you to put your email address in there and register to receive updates of any more events like this one today. There's some polls at the bottom of the page here, which are for those who don't have the time to sort of provide a lengthy response on the online questionnaire. If you do just have a minute and you want to make the point that this issue is important to you, you can do so through this poll. But the main way to respond to the consultation, which is linked from the site I just showed, is the online questionnaire, which is on Citizen Space, which is the council's consultation hub. There's a link to it here, so when I send the consultation these slides around, you'll be able to go there directly. So there's an online questionnaire there, and as I said, there's 2 questions to do with living well, and I would like to hope that some of the discussion we've had here will help you to formulate your thoughts and perhaps make some suggestions. And if you have seen other good policies in other parts of the country around health and well-being, which you think we should be considering, would very much like you to provide us with details and put those in your response, because we're really keen to learn from best practice around the country. It's something that's gaining a bit more traction in planning, spatial planning and health over recent years. So we're very keen to hear any experiences you may have. So I think now is a chance for questions, and there's a link here for a feedback form. Obviously, we don't usually do our events in quite this way, but we've tried to be adaptable due to the lockdown. I know for some people it's great to be able to do a virtual event. For other people it might be a bit more tricky than coming in person. So we would love to hear from you if you've found it useful, or if there's another way we might do things in future, please do let us know. So I will stop sharing and we'll have a look and see if there's any questions.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Elena. And thank you, Freya, for the presentation. Really appreciate the information. And can I start by just asking a quick question of Freya? We're being charged with the challenge of making sure, and of course we will be, that it our planning works with mobility impaired residents. But what about sensory impaired as well? Freya, like to just give a quick answer on that.
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about people with differing needs, we would include both sensory and mobility impaired residents within that. So yeah, both things will be taken into account when we look at that. That's
really helpful. Thank you. We've got some other questions, and in fact the one about heavy doors, I've actually asked us to perhaps follow that one up later. I think that's probably about fire doors on flats and things. It can be a real barrier to getting out of your own property. I understand that. So, perhaps Josh would like to comment on that.
Yes. Hello. It's just one of those where we're supporting a few people that we do, who every time we see them can't open the door so we can so we have to essentially open their front door for them.
Yeah.
And it's one of those where I'm not necessarily sure if the door is built as a fire door or not, but it's something that almost that kind of accessibility in building plans has not necessarily sometimes, is overlooked. Or it could just be a case of the lockdown has meant a lot of elderly residents have lost a lot of the strength that they would have had this time last year. So it could be something that is developing purely because of lockdown.
Okay, we'll take that as a specific issue now, because that sounds like something that can't wait till 2023. So we'll take that on, excuse me, immediately. Okay, thank you. I think the first question is from Christine Holloway saying, I stress that averaging air pollution isn't the way to assess the significance because it's so localised in a few places, e.g. some streets in Winchester town. Who would like to answer this one? Should I bring it to Bridget?
Yes, I think, and we know that there are particular areas of the district which have a particular problem with air quality in the centre, in particular near those busy roads. So particularly for NOx as opposed to PM10, which I think spreads a bit more. So yes, so the measuring method does average a specific location over a period of time, but rather than being an average across space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, there's definitely a need for consideration of specific localities and the issue in those localities, yes.
But we are aware that of the 124,295 people, about 47,000 live actually in central Winchester. So it is a concern for those people. I know that, and it's really important that we deal with it. But actually, long term, it's something that we also know that the air pollution within inside people's homes can also be poor. So a very localized air pollution for fires, for instance, open fires and things, can actually put particulates rather than NOx into their own homes. So perhaps that's something we should be thinking about very seriously. And mold, that sort of thing within cold homes. So thank you. The next one is about Felicity's commenting, occupational therapists can advise on housing plans and adaptations. Absolutely. But I'd be quite interested to hear from Felicity about Homes for Life, if you want to make a comment. If she's there. Not come through. Perhaps Bridget
Hi,
or...
sorry.
Oh, Felicity?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, Homes for Life, I think, it's something I'm aware of, but not recently looked up. My specialty was paediatrics, but absolutely, there are schemes available that would guide planning and
Yes.
provide houses that could be used for a wide range of needs that are fully accessible.
You're probably aware that Winchester City Council has their own council homes, and it's something that we've always, or for a long time, have been really promoting, the principle of a home for life that has that flexibility.
Yeah.
But
can we get that into other developers' approaches?
Yes. Adrian, would you like to comment on this?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Yeah, Homes for Life is still a very much applicable concept that we look at in terms of making sure it is multi-generational and obviously fit for the future. And I think that's particularly important in terms of obviously as we move forward and making sure our homes are flexible. I know it's come up in a number of other discussions that we've had. So I do think it's a very important point in terms of how we assess what type of homes we are actually building in the future.
Yeah, and one of the challenges I've had with certainly with housing associations is that they'll give accessibility out the front door but not out the back door, so people can get out onto the main street but they can't get back out into their own garden. And I think that's something that we need to make sure it's fully, that all accesses in and out of the property are fully accessible. So I think that's a really important point. So I'm just going to follow on from that one, Felicity. I'm assuming we've covered up the heavy doors one, but we will follow that up immediately rather than waiting. Liz Hutchison said there's a need for more mapping in Winchester in particular with regard to open space, and a need to identify the many paths that lead directly into the countryside. And this is key as access to open space and nature. Similarly, safe streets and access to existing open parks and parks are crucial. Liz, would you just like to say something about that?
Yes, it was something that was actually missed out from the last local plan. And when you look at the different areas and access to open spaces, it's a really important thing that in very many parts of Winchester, there is really superb access to nature and to open spaces along these paths. But unless they're mapped and it's identified as such, it doesn't appear on the statistics and how it actually works. And linked to that, I think making the existing open spaces and parks really accessible has to take priority in many ways over new ones. And that relates to the streets and how the people from residential areas and from the town centre can access them. To give you one sort of little example, there was some new development on the fire station site opposite Winnell Moors, but no crossing point, so that people could leave those homes and go straight into the most wonderful open spaces safely. So those things need to be looked at together very much. And I suppose just I put one other question, since I've been invited to say something, is how do we make the local plan proactive? Rather than being something that advises developers on new developments, but how do we actually go to the next step to see that these brilliant ideas and a lot of concepts and all going in the right direction can influence the existing as well as the new?
Yes. In fact, I had a conversation with some developers this morning, and they were saying, okay, tell us what you want us to do that might make this more of a proactive conversation. So it was a really good conclusion to a conversation, actually. Thank you. Steve Lincoln said there'll be lots of issues identified that aren't resolved specifically through the planning system. So I'm keen to work with Adrian and Bridget to embed these into other plans and wellbeing services. Yes, sometimes it's not actually a planning problem, it's a wellbeing problem, and we need to make sure we do that. But essentially, the local plan identifies land uses for specific purposes. And an example of a land use that's just coming to fruition, actually, I suppose, is the principle of having a walking and cycling highway between Abbots Barton and the Andover Road, which actually shortens a journey that would have been taken by car by most people to something that could be really pleasant and enjoyed as a walk. And that's an example of one of the ways in which we hope to use land planning to improve health as well. Christine said, thanks for the response on air pollution. I appreciate the Winchester City Council is on the case, but I was responding to Hampshire County Council's public health suggestion that Winchester is below average for the South East. I've heard them say this before as a reason for not worrying about it. They need to acknowledge that averaging isn't the way to assess the significance of the problem. Freya, I think this might be for you, or possibly Elena.
Elena, did you want to comment?
Yeah.
Do you want me to?
Sorry, I think my camera's that's better. Sorry, I'm having a few technical issues. Freya might want to come in. I suppose just from my perspective, we were really giving so public health around population health. So that's why we were generally talking about the district. We were trying to caveat it by actually, even though there's certain areas that are doing well, it's still an issue. So I guess we didn't specifically focus on air pollution. So absolutely take your point that there's going to be little pockets in Winchester that have significantly high issues around air pollution, and that would need to be addressed. But from a public health perspective, we look on a much broader scale. I don't know whether there's anything else you'd like to add, Freya.
Yeah, just to say that I suppose from a health impact assessment perspective as well, when we look at the air quality supplementary planning document, we have looked at specific pockets where NO2 and PM2.5 is particularly high. So when we've averaged out the figures, as Alina says, it might appear not to be particularly high, but we're quite cognizant of the fact that those bits are quite concentrated. So those are what we're looking to kind of put the infrastructure into to improve.
Thank you. Simon, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Porter. Yeah, just for those of you who don't know me, I'm Simon Finch. I'm at Winchester City Council, Corporate Head of Regulatory Services. So that's all things planning, including the local plan, and a number of outward-facing services that we operate. So some of this does all hopefully connect up, and we do try to join the dots on these sorts of things. I take the point that Chris is making there, and I know we've discussed this on different occasions going back over a number of years. What we have to do is obviously address where we have a statutory problem and a designation. That's incumbent on us to do that, and we've made real progress actually. It's a much improving picture when measured against that particular metric. But I think there is a wider recognition, and it's not just about planning. Local plan is one of the tools in the box, but not the only tool. We've got other tools that we can use in terms of parking strategies, all sorts of things, when we're looking at air quality. Because there are, as far as I'm aware, and I've always been told that people that know a lot more than I do, that there's no sort of safe, there's not such a safe amount of air pollution. So really what we have to do to start, we've got to start somewhere, so you address those standards. But in actual fact, it is more than that. It's looking across the district, it's looking at whether we can go beyond those statutory minimums. And the government as well is also not just looking at the metrics that are in place at the moment. We may revisit a particular matter as well. The PM sort of 2.5, as they call it technically, which is very small matter, which can get into your system, your lungs, etc., and affect health. So I think it is more than just that, but you have to start somewhere. So you've got to put, when you're targeting a resource to begin with, that's what you do. But I know it's amongst the members on there, as Councillor Porter, and I'm sure will say it's something that's on their consciousness as well, in their in their sort of their line of sight as well. So we'll fully take that on board. We've just got to remember what the local plan has got to do and what it can't do, only because we have to get it through against the backdrop of a national policy and get that endorsed by a local plan inspector. But absolutely taking on board there is no room just to simply say job done or complacency. It's a much broader issue, and I think actually locally and nationally that's becoming increasingly recognised. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you. And going on from that, really, I think that the whole council is very conscious about the need for a healthy home in itself, but also I think it was Freya's comment about a decent home, job and friends are more important to mental health. Our own staff actually have noticed an increase in our neighbourhood services teams, have noticed an increase on the concerns about mental health and their potential for end of life. So I think that's really well made. So I think from the comments we've been hearing today, I'm just going to go back onto the chat just to check if there's any other comments, but on the comments we've been hearing today, I think that we do realise that there is a link between the environment in which we live and the health of our residents. And Felicity has asked, could there be more links with local farmers to encourage use of local footpaths and more sustainable biodiverse green space, while also helping other users, while helping all users to respect the countryside? I think probably Joan might like to respond to that.
Right, thank you for that. Yes, as you'll see in the chat, I've mentioned a few comments about our green and blue infrastructure strategy that we're in process of developing. And it's quite an exciting project because we're looking to use a lot of interactive mapping tools, which was a point raised by one of the contributors a few minutes ago. So we should be able to get much better mapping access to show how people can access the open spaces, and then we're going to try and develop that so that we can put things in the local plan and on site-specific developments that will help to improve this access in the future. And we're very conscious that it goes beyond the plan area, and we definitely need to make sure that the South Downs is not there's no barriers to the South Downs, and that we can actually access something that is very near to Winchester, but can actually physically access it. In terms of the local farmers, I'm afraid I'm not much of an expert on farming, but it is true that you can have large areas of countryside, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are publicly accessible. Working with local farmers is something that we will need to do, but that will perhaps go beyond the local plan. I know the County Council have an active countryside services, and they may be able to assist in that. It's a good point that we can think about how we develop that in the future. We're looking for sort of ideas as to how we can improve all of these things. So if anybody has anything along those lines they want to add in the responses to the consultation, please do. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's been a subject of conversation about when open land or when land does become public, in that sense, how much of it actually is accessible to the public, and the challenge that presents. And it's particularly come into focus in the last 12 months, I'd say. So it's a conversation that as a county councillor we have frequently, as well as city councillors. So I think everybody's very...
Yes, if I could just drop in there.
Yeah.
There is quite a national desire to more right to roam across the countryside, and the fact that it's been established nationally, and I don't know what the situation is locally. Again, the county council do have some information about footpaths, that some public footpaths are not actually as accessible as they should be. No. But that I don't know if that's a problem in Hampshire. Well, but
yeah,
those are sorts of details that we'll need looking at. But it definitely goes further than the local plan, and it's action on the ground and with individuals. So we can all help with that kind of thing in the future.
I'm going to go back actually to the Winchester City Council local plan, because actually one local development that's happened in my own ward in Kingsworthy is the HAB development, which has a large field attached to it, which has a walk around it, sort of a Breed and Gravel National Trust type walk around it. During lockdown, it has been so busy that one of my fellow councillors has estimated that 2 people are walking around its circuit every 6 minutes. There are people going around it literally the whole time, just a decent distance away from each other. These are older people who perhaps wouldn't tackle a public footpath, but they know that by walking around that they've walked a couple of kilometres every day and they're using it very regularly. And that for me is a perfect example. And on the sign it says, "You are welcome to play ball games on the grass," which is a really lovely way of saying it. Nobody's using it at the moment for that. They're just looking at the flowers and things, but it's just a really good example of good planning that's brought about something that's of real benefit to that community and hopefully is improving health. I'm afraid my screen at the moment has decided only to have the questions or your faces, so I have to keep clicking to go back to the questions. So excuse me if you see my finger trying desperately to get between one or the other. We've also got Simon, who's just mentioned about we've adopted our biodiversity action plan. It's a beautiful document. I do recommend you have a look at that on our website. And it also justifies why we believe it's important to manage open space really well, and the public may have access to some of it, or they may have access to all of it, but please do have a look at that. Christine saying, Ray, earlier question, planning includes local plans very much on the agenda for HWB. I'm sure I should know what HWB is, but I'm not thinking I can.
Sorry, Councillor.
Freya was asking.
Sorry, I think Christine asked a question earlier about the local plan being on the agenda for the Health and Wellbeing Board meeting.
Yeah, our Health and Wellbeing Board, sorry. Yeah,
yeah sorry, that's me.
Yes. Did you want to speak about that then? Do you want to talk about that?
Sorry, I didn't know if someone else was chiming in there.
Right. Could you or Elena talk about
the local
plans being on?
Yeah. No, sorry, I thought I heard someone else speaking. No, yeah, I was just saying to Christine that it's definitely on the agenda for the Health and Wellbeing Board, including our kind of planning across the other districts. So yeah, definitely up as a priority.
And I'd say actually one of the positives, if there could be any positives of COVID-19, is that we've all become much closer as a group of people at the council and in public health departments, and knowing that this is something we've got to tackle together and not just as one on one side. I think it's been a real positive over the time, how much closer we are to the NHS and also to public health. As two complete, one's planning it and one's hopefully tackling it. So thank you very much indeed. Christine's mentioned many measures that tackle climate emergency also address health, physical and mental. Fewer cars, more active travel leads to better mental health, less obesity, fewer musculoskeletal problems, clean air, lung disease reduced, more friendly neighbourhoods and children taking more exercise. Absolutely, Christine. And actually we may well have a few people with musculoskeletal problems after they spent hours and hours on Zoom and Teams, I'm sure. Some of us don't get up until we suddenly realise we can't move an inch. So are there any other questions that anybody wanted to raise or any points that people want to raise? I'm going to swap back to, hopefully back to a screen. It's not working. You'll have to excuse me. I'm just, I'm going to leave it as this because I know that hopefully yours still, it's made it move back. It's being a bit slow on the update today. Has anybody else got any more questions? Bridget, did you want to raise anything?
No, I think it's been a really good overview of the issues. I think we've talked quite a lot about open space, which is unsurprising. I think that's one of the big issues that's forefront in our minds, and there's a lot of thinking nationally about it as a planning issue. And there's a lot of research coming out as well, which is great. And then I suppose as we move through the local plan process, it's probably worth mentioning that the government has proposed changes to the planning system. They're proposing that we make greater use of design codes, so that we would create a design code for a particular place. And I'd really like to think that now that we're initiating a discussion around health and well-being and planning, that down the line, if these changes do come into force, that it would be a really good thing to take forward. If we start thinking about specific design principles for specific places, we can then have a more in-depth discussion about street trees and what they might do in helping us to get out and about, or principles around dementia-friendly planning, so principles around wayfinding and signage and making places legible and help people to navigate their environments if they were to get a bit confused. There's lots of things there that are really site-specific design principles that I'm sure we could, you know, have a really good discussion about down the line if that does come into force. So if that's of interest to anyone on the call, then please do, on the website, register your email address as being particularly interested in this topic, and then if and when that comes into force, you know, we'll get back in touch for another discussion. Yes, I think one of the conversations we've obviously been having is about transport as well, and making transport accessible if we are discussing how we make particular routes more attractive to developers so that we actually get the transport all along one route, because the more frequently people can get out and about, the better that is. And the other point is, we've talked a lot about the way in which adults get around, and older people, but younger people too. If they have good transport right from the beginning, they don't feel they need to drive a car, and they perhaps will use a car much less than, or a personal vehicle much less. And so we really want to get some really good habits into younger people too, and to children too. The other point was about food production, and we have allotments, and I wondered if anybody feels they wanted to comment on food production generally. We've thought about putting the requirement into any major development area into food production, but how could we do that on a much more local scale for smaller developments? We're really interested to hear your comments. Nothing coming. Any comments on that? I think, you know, bearing in mind that most of our housing arrives on smaller developments, we need to think about the impact of health on our smaller developments as well as our larger ones. So we'd be really appreciative if you can have a think about how we can get that sense of community in a smaller development that builds up, whether it's affordable or private developments. It would be really helpful to have any comments about that as well. I don't think there are any more questions at the moment. If anybody's got anything. Adrian, do you want to say? Oh, Bridget wants to say something. There's just one more in there from Felicity, which says, oh, sorry, I've lost it now, about the Biodiversity Action Plan. It's a great start, but it does concentrate on specialist areas. How can we encourage everyone, all our gardens and local green spaces, to become more sustainable?
That's really interesting, because this morning on this other developers talk, I just had breakfast and a woodpecker was eating from my bird table. And I was saying, I know it sounds a bit trite, but actually the joy that brought probably set me up for the day mentally, and in a simple way. And finding a flower in the garden that I hadn't known was open and was actually going to be open today. So that aspect of it is really important, isn't it? So do you want to ask that question again, see if anybody's got any answers?
Yeah, I would probably chip into it actually and say one of the things that, again, is the government is working on introducing a concept called Biodiversity Net Gain, which would require that any development, essentially, you would need to improve the biodiversity on your site. So there is the possibility that that could apply to small developments on individual householder applications, and it might be that you can improve biodiversity on your property by installing bird boxes or hedgehog tunnels or bee hotels or all these kind of things. So there's certainly a lot of things that can be done on a smaller scale, and similarly for local green space, to enhance biodiversity and sustainability of those sites. Yeah. So that's something the local plan could pick up. One of the topics is biodiversity, and looking at what measures we would require.
Particularly as 40% of our district is already in the national park, and that has a biodiversity net gain requirement as well. We don't think it's fair that 40% of our district should have and 60% doesn't. So I think that's important. So we really would appreciate anybody's views on that in their response. In the response, there are a number of open boxes as well. So you're very welcome to complete those open boxes to make your views known. Adrian, would you like to comment or conclude?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. No, thank you very much, everybody, for all their really helpful comments. I do feel that the local plan has a really positive role to play and a crucial role to play in to move this agenda forward. It's inextricably linked with obviously what's at the heart of the local plan in terms of the climate emergency, and obviously how we link together communities and make them obviously a more sustainable places. And obviously we address obviously the inequalities that obviously we've heard about today, and obviously improve people's health and mental well-being, which is obviously something at the forefront of all our minds as a result of COVID. And there are fundamental links between health and well-being and planning. So I do think that we need to fully take those into account as part of the development of the local plan and ensure that we are planning kind of responsible neighbourhoods and settlements that obviously put health and people's mental well-being at the forefront of our minds when we're planning our new local plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anybody else? Simon, do you want to say anything before we finish?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. No, I think it's been a really good session actually, and some very, very good comments. I think the word cloud, I'm a really big fan of word cloud actually. I haven't relatively sort of come across it in the last couple of years, but I think it's a really, really good way of getting information and feedback, which we can then take forward. But I think the most important thing is about trying to join all of these things up, and I think that's where the local plan can come in. And the local plan has limitations like anything that's designed to shape development, so it can't go back and retrofit things, unfortunately, and things like that. So it has to take the opportunity to shape the future, but it can do a lot of these things, and it can join things up. And we've got a good evidence base. You know, we've got things like the City of Winchester vision, etc. And there's some really good things in there about that tick a number or hit a number of objectives. So if you do join those things up, you have sustainable neighbourhoods, you have services that are local, people can use active transport to access them, this sort of 15-minute city or neighbourhood that we've talked about in other workshops that we've done. And all of that relates back to things like the location of development, provision of open spaces, protection of open spaces, links between them, and all those things that people have been highlighting as issues today. And that then knocks into things like carbon neutrality, air quality, etc. Because if you often improve on one front by, for example, reducing the need for people to jump in a car or whatever and travel, then that has a number of different benefits. It can improve air quality, it can help with carbon neutrality, the biggest source of that locally is transport, etc. So there are a number of things, and I think what the local plan tries to do, hopefully, is to bring those threads together into a cohesive plan that can help shape the future of the development in the district for the future. Thank you, and I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to give us some very useful feedback. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you. So as a group of people, you have signed up today because you were really fascinated, or it's part of your job, or you're just really passionate about making sure people are living well. So we want to ask you very specifically to respond to the local plan consultation. It's www.localplan.winchester.gov.uk. Please take the time to complete your contact details and the living well details, and then hopefully you'll have time to go back and look as well at some of the other sections in the planning consultation. We really want to hear from people who really do take living well to heart in this district. So thank you very much for joining today. And as I say, I'm still stuck on the captions page, but thank you very much indeed for today. Really appreciate you coming along, and please do fill in the consultation, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks very much again. Thank you.